One of those things that people usually remember is the job of St. Joseph. What did St. Joseph do for a living? People usually say carpenter, and he probably was a carpenter, but much more than that, he was somebody who could make things well. He could build and design and put together the various materials that might be needed to make something. He was what's called a craftsman. It means somebody who works very skillfully with things, materials like wood and stone and metal. And also we know that Jesus was called this too. Jesus was a craftsman, good at making things. Probably the things that Jesus learnt from St. Joseph how to make, above all perhaps, were houses. In those days, houses were usually made of stone where Jesus lived, and then they would have a wooden roof. I don't know what they would put on top of the roof, probably branches and so on, to keep the sun out and keep the rain out. Jesus certainly, I think, did think about building and houses and stones. He often talked about stones. In fact, in the Bible that we're listening to at the moment in our masses, we're listening to what's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's a sermon Jesus gave to his friends, his disciples, telling them what it was to be one of his disciples, to be his followers, what it was to share in the friendship of Jesus, to have Jesus in our lives. And when he's finished, he's saying, if you've been listening to what I've been saying, he does say a lot, but then at the end he says, if you've been listening to what I've been saying, and then you put it into action, and you live the way I try to live and the way I'm trying to teach you, then you're like somebody who built a house on firm, solid foundations. And when the time came for there to be a storm or whatever, that house would be solid and it wouldn't fall over. Do you remember what he said would be a bad way to build a house, to start building a house? He said it'd be like somebody building a house on sand. If wind came and floods, for instance, what would happen to that house? It would be swept away, wouldn't have firm foundations. Jesus said, using that example of building houses that he probably knew about, because he and his father Joseph, his earthly father Joseph rather, probably built houses together. So he says, if you hear what I'm teaching you and you act on it and you make it the way you live and the way you are as a person, then you have a firm foundation, you've built a firm house. Do you ever play at building houses, or maybe play with a doll's house? You might use Lego bricks, or I remember my father built a doll's house for my sister. It was lovely. Different rooms you could decorate and imagine family life going on in that house. As well as bricks and wood, things like that, a good house, if it's a good home, needs much more than that, doesn't it? Doesn't matter if we live in a big house or not so big house. Remember when I was growing up, our house was full of people. It was quite small, but we were a family of 7, so it was quite busy. But I remember that my house, the house where I grew up, was a very happy place and a loving place. I suppose what we want for a house, for a home, somewhere that's warm and dry, and somewhere where we feel safe and where we're free to be ourselves and share love and kindness, to be part of a family, whether your house is ever so grand or small. That's the house we would love to have, isn't it? We think of people in the news at the moment, in the earthquakes, how their houses have gone, and we pray for them that they'll find houses again to live in, and they'll enjoy happiness with their families. We pray for those who have died. Jesus, when he's talking in this great sermon, gives us all kinds of teachings, helping us to be good followers of hers, helping us to be his disciples. And when he's doing this, he doesn't say, I think this is the right way to go. He doesn't say, I've read in the Bible this. No. He tells us, this is what I am giving you as your instruction for how to live, how to be. How can he be so sure? How can he be so certain? Because he's not really the son of Joseph, is he? He is the Son of God. He is God himself, and he teaches us. And at the end of all this long sermon, the Sermon on the Mount that I'm talking about, he tells us how he will come at the end of time and gather all those who are his friends to be with him forever in heaven. In John's Gospel, he says it's like I'm building my Father's has a wonderful palace or house for you to come and live in, a place full of happiness and kindness, to live in the way that Jesus is showing us. It's because Jesus is God that he can tell us these things. In a way, Jesus is like a craftsman helping to form us, helping to make us something wonderful. In fact, I don't suppose you've ever listened very much to the first, what we call the collect, the first prayer in the Mass. But actually for this week, we ask Jesus to make us. So he's like a craftsman. He's making something, but not a house out there. We ask him to make us a home where he can be. Of course, it's only by his grace that we could be somewhere where God could come and live. That's what we pray for, beginning of Mass this Sunday. We ask God to make us, through living just, doing what's right and fair, and honest and sincere, so we're not pretending. Jesus makes us that way by his grace. He'll make us into a place where he can live. At the end of time, Jesus will come to see and meet all those who have welcomed him into their hearts and into their lives, who've been a home for him, not like the home built on sand, people who heard what he said and ignored it, but people who were really turned by Jesus, the craftsman, into a home for him, turned by God himself, our Creator, into the creation that he wants us to be. He gives examples in Mass today when we listen. For instance, he tells us, in the Old Testament laws that Moses gave on the mountain, he said, don't kill. Now I'm telling you here on this mountain, you mustn't hate. You mustn't be scornful or unkind in what you say to others. Treat others with respect and care and love. That's the way Jesus wants our hearts to be. He tells us how people swear oaths. They say, I promise by this, that and the other. Jesus says there's no need for that in a house where he is at home. We just simply have to tell the truth, to be straight and true to people, not pretending, not tricking them, and so on. He tells us about love and the love between a husband and wife, and how that must be a love which is truly given for life. And equally in our lives, where we treat each other, we should be fair friends and we should be faithful friends. And we have a friend, stick by them as far as we can. These are all ways in which Jesus is teaching us, not just lessons to be heard and forgotten, lessons to help make us into a dwelling place for Jesus, a home for Jesus. And that'll be to be a firmly built, solidly built house on rock that will last forever. And Jesus, when he comes in glory at the end of time, will say, oh yes, I know you. I've lived with you in your life, and I've seen how you've tried to live as a follower of mine, as a friend of mine. These are the commandments, these are the ways, these are the teachings that Jesus gave to his disciples, his friend, on the mountain long ago, that he gives to us today.